Hey everybody, it's Dr. Shani with the Connection Experience. So last week we talked about the 7 effective traits of parenting. And so I decided to do a week of observation. If you remember from the last video, one of the things that said I needed to work on was boundaries. So I decided to do a week of observation just to see where I needed to improve in my boundaries and just monitoring for myself, like when I was overstepping or when I wasn't saying no when I should have, or maybe when I was a little permissive with the children, just to see, where I need to start. So just a little tip, anytime you're trying to implement some change, do a little observation first. Know what it is that you're going in to correct or to adjust in some way. You don't ever want to just go in blind because you might be missing out on some of your strengths. You want to be able to know what needs to stay the same because you're doing fine in that, and then what needs improvement. So do a little observation first just to do a little assessment around what your actual strengths and weaknesses are, where they show up in your everyday life. So I knew by taking the assessment, boundaries is something I want to pay a little attention to. And so I did. And one of the things that I noticed was that I tried to spare my children from some of my negative emotions. I think as parents, we do that a lot. We try to shield them from any type of distress because we don't want them to absorb it, and we don't want them to feel what we're feeling, especially if it's not an emotion that they need to own. So, but I think we need to move a little bit away from that. One, because part of teaching emotional intelligence is by helping people understand, one, the difference between their feelings and someone else, but also identification and how to self-soothe and how to recognize boundaries around that, when you're imposing your emotion on someone else and you shouldn't, or when you're just modeling something. So part of our job as parents is to model for our children how to recognize emotion in ourselves and in others. Give it a name. Give it a name. Make sure they understand what to call what they're feeling. And in order to do that, you have to do it yourself. You need to model that. You need to be able to have teaching moments around that, especially when they're noticing. Because if your kids are like my kids, they notice everything. My son watches me. He knows when I'm frowning, when my voice is escalating. He knows when mommy and daddy are fussing at each other. He knows, and he has no filter, so he calls it out. He tells me all the time, "Mommy, stop yelling." He checks in. "Mommy, are you sad? Mommy, are you happy?" He asks me every single day if I'm happy. And sometimes he's checking because he wants to be sure that I'm happy with him. So part of emotional intelligence is also being able to separate behavior from the person. They need to be able to do that, just like we need to be able to do that. And when he's asking me if I'm happy, he's asking if I'm happy with him. And normally he's asking me if I'm happy when he's messed up and I'm fussing at him about something. And he'll go, "Mommy, are you happy?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm always happy." And that's such an automatic response to me that I didn't even realize I was doing it until one day he saw me not happy. He saw me sad. He saw me frustrated. And he checked in and he said, "Mommy, are you happy?" And he was confused because my response is usually, "I'm always happy." And he was confused because my face wasn't showing that. It wasn't congruent with what he understands happiness to be. So he asked me if I'm happy, and I just decided to say, I almost said, "I'm always happy." But you don't want to send mixed signals. You don't want to show tears in your eyes and frustration on your face and then tell them that you're happy. That's not emotional intelligence. That's confusing. So I said, "You know what? Right now, Fox, I'm a little sad. Right now, I'm a little frustrated." And he goes, "Oh." He's never heard me say that before. And then he asked if it was about him. "Are you mad at me?" No, I'm not mad at you. I don't like what you did, but I'm not mad at you. "Do you love me?" "Oh, of course. Of course I love you. I'll always love you no matter what. I just don't like what you did. Let's talk about what you did." And that way you're separating him from the bad behavior, from him being a bad child, right? He's temperature checking a little bit. He's trying to see if he messes up, do I lose your love? If he messes up, does that make me a bad kid? And no. You want to address the behavior and not necessarily him as a person. That's the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is about a behavior and shame is about the person. I did something bad versus I am bad. And we model this every day for our kids by how we show our frustrations and our feelings. So he asked me a lot, and now I'm going to be genuine and authentic with him and let him know that, overall I'm a happy person, but there are days where I'm sad and there are days when I'm frustrated, and that's okay. It doesn't take away from my overall happiness, but in this moment, yes, what you're seeing is correct. If he's watching me, and I give him an inaccurate message about what I'm showing, my negative emotion, then I'm teaching him to be confused about his own, right? Screaming and crying, but saying he's happy, or being happy and saying he's not. It can lead to that. So you want to be as authentic with them as possible. And information matters to kids. I know sometimes we feel like we shouldn't do a lot of explaining, but this is where you should. So I'm watching myself and I'm like, okay, I'm trying to shield them so much from my own discomfort that one, I'm not allowing myself to be uncomfortable or sad or frustrated because I'm trying so hard to shield them from it. And again, if your kids are like my kids, they don't give you a lot of space, okay? My children would literally crawl back up in me if they could. They try all the time. They're attached at the hip. They're like koala bears. They won't leave me alone. They on my leg. And so if I'm frustrated, if I'm sad, I either try not to feel those things so that I'm not bothering them with it or helping them absorb it. I don't want them to feel responsible for my feelings. Or I'm trying to run away so I can experience it. And there's a middle ground, right? It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be frustrated. You may have to do some explaining, but it's also okay to take a break. What I don't need to do anymore is to try and not feel those things. One, because it doesn't help. It always comes out in another way. And two, I'm not showing them how to self-soothe and how to cope with those kinds of things that come up, and they will come up. So just sharing my journey on how I'm going to start observing and correcting certain things that prevent me from being a person, not just a mom, but a person, but also using that authenticity to teach. And that way it's a win-win. They don't lose anything and you get something back for yourself. They gain information and emotional intelligence, and you gain permission to feel, permission to experience negative emotion, not to bottle it up for the sake of your family. That's a poor boundary. I realize now that that's a poor boundary. So all of this is beneficial to everyone. You get to unpack, you get to be yourself, you get to be authentic, and you get to teach, and they get to learn. And it still is a bonding experience. It is a connection experience for you and your family without you having to sacrifice. Right? Make sense? All right. Monitor for yourselves where you might be doing this in your own life. Do a little self-check and see where you can make some adjustments. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next week on Toolbox Tuesday. This is Dr. Shani. Bye.